The afternoon sun glinted off the champagne flutes at the Willow Creek Country Club, where old money and older prejudices held court. Eleanor Whitmore, the silver-haired queen of Chicago's elite, barely glanced up from her Chardonnay as the woman in the pearl-white church hat approached the terrace. "Since when do we seat the help with members?" She drawled loud enough to ripple through the linen-clad tables. She had no idea the woman she'd just dismissed was Margaret Carter, the steel-spined mother of the tech visionary about to save her family's crumbling empire. Margaret had dressed carefully for this lunch. Her A-line dress pressed her gloves pristine, the same hat her late James had loved. Her son Marcus had built next-gen logistics from a Detroit garage to a billion-dollar empire, and today's merger with Whitmore Industries was supposed to be a formality. But the moment the club manager stepped in her path, service staff used the rear entrance. Margaret felt the old familiar sting. This time, though, the insult landed in front of Marcus, who'd spent a lifetime swallowing slights so his mother wouldn't have to. The terrace froze as Marcus stood, his pen hovering over the unsigned contract. "Funny," he said, voice like polished obsidian. "I could have sworn we were here as guests." A beat of silence, then Eleanor's brittle laugh. "Surely you understand how unusual this looks." That's when Margaret did something unexpected. She reached into her purse and slid a faded photo across the table. Marcus, at 8 years old, sobbing after his first-grade teacher assumed he'd stolen another boy's lunch. "Unusual?" she said softly. "Try predictable." What happened next wasn't just about a deal. It was about a son who'd rather torch $900 million than let his mother's dignity be the cost of doing business. By the time Margaret's Lincoln Navigator peeled away, the real merger was already underway, not between companies, but between generations of silence and the roar of a movement that would leave Willow Creek forever changed. Sometimes the richest people in the room are the ones who walk away from the table. Vera set down her pruning shears with a quiet sigh. "When you stand tall, child, you cast a long shadow." She wiped her hands on her apron, revealing faded scars from decades of scrubbing floors. "Folks who can't stand the light will try to trip you in the dark." The truth of her words hit the next morning. A tabloid published grainy photos of Quincy at a charity gala years prior, claiming he'd snubbed a disabled veteran. But by noon, the veteran himself, Marine Sergeant Elijah Carter, was live on CNN holding the signed jersey Quincy had privately gifted him that same night. "This man," Elijah said, jabbing a finger at the screen, "paid my daughter's medical bills when the VA stalled. Y'all picked the wrong hero to mess with." Meanwhile, in a Park Avenue high-rise, Patricia received a hand-delivered envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid, her own father shaking hands with Quincy's grandfather at a 1960s labor rally, proof their family's fates had been intertwined long before either heir was born. The scrawled note on the back read, "You were the help once too." That evening, Quincy found Vera at the kitchen table humming as she folded laundry. The TV played muted footage of Kingsley Group's headquarters being vandalized with graffiti, "Dignity Dollars." He reached to turn it off, but she stopped him. "Leave it," she said, smoothing a wrinkle from his shirt. "Let them see what happens when you mistake silence for weakness." The final blow came not from Quincy, but from within. At 3 a.m., Patricia's longtime chauffeur quit via Instagram, posting security footage of her throwing a stapler at an intern who'd brought her bitter coffee. The caption, "Real Queens Lift People Up." By sunrise, Bitter Coffee Challenge had taken over TikTok, with baristas worldwide refusing to serve Karens in Patricia's honor. Some defeats aren't measured in stock dips or headlines, but in the quiet moments when the world stops listening. As Quincy helped his mother plant tomatoes that weekend, the radio played Marvin Gaye's "Mercy, Mercy Me." Vera smiled at the coincidence. Neither noticed the black sedan idling down the block, Clinton Kingsley watching through the chain-link fence, remembering when his family had roots too. The letter stayed folded in Quincy's suit pocket for days, its edges softening like well-worn dollar bills. He found himself reaching for it during board meetings, running a thumb over Camille's careful cursive when decisions got tough. Then on a rainy Thursday, his assistant burst in with a forwarded email. Camille Pierce had just published an op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer titled, "What My Father's Wheelbarrow Taught Me About Billion-Dollar Principles." The piece went viral before lunch. By 3 p.m., Groundskeeper's Daughters was trending as maintenance workers across the country posted photos of their calloused hands holding pay stubs next to their kids' college diplomas. But the real twist came when Quincy's team dug deeper. Camille's late father hadn't just maintained Kingsley Ridge. He'd witnessed Patricia's husband bribing a city inspector in '92. The receipt buried in a toolbox he'd left her. Quincy flew to Philly that night, standing in Camille's modest living room as she pulled a rusted metal box from her closet. Inside lay a yellowed invoice for landscaping services, dated the week of the bribe with a handwritten note on the back. "Paid $10K cash to ignore zoning violations. Tell no one. Tell. You don't have to do this," Quincy said as Camille handed him the evidence. She just smiled, tapping the op-ed headline on her laptop. Some silences cost too much to keep. The next morning, Vera answered her door to find a dozen groundkeepers from local businesses standing on her stoop holding rakes like honor guards. "For the woman who raised a man who remembers us," said their spokesman, an elderly Jamaican with knees bowed from decades of kneeling at flower beds. Vera, never one for speeches, simply opened her arms wide. The photo of that embrace broke the internet anew. Meanwhile, Patricia's world shrank further. Her favorite charity auction canceled her table. Her dry cleaner lost her favorite Chanel suit. Even her lapdog, a spoiled Pomeranian, seemed to side-eye her more. The final humiliation came when Vanity Fair published a spread titled, "The Help Who Outlasted the Empire," featuring Vera's church hat beside Camille's letter, Quincy's warehouse ID, and the groundskeeper's rusted toolbox. Legacies aren't built in boardrooms or country clubs. They're planted in quiet soil by unseen hands and bloom when the world least expects it. As Quincy walked through Sterling Logistics' newest warehouse, where every employee now earned living wages and stock options, he paused by a framed photo of Camille's father tending roses. The plaque read, "True wealth grows from remembered roots. Some victories don't make headlines. They make history." Camille's grip on the doorknob tightened for just a second before she stepped aside, her voice barely above a whisper. "My daddy always said banana bread was his favorite." The scent of cinnamon and old books wrapped around them as Quincy followed her into the small living room where a framed photo of Robert Pierce in his groundskeeping uniform sat beside a stack of graded math papers. Then came the twist no one expected. Winston, the rescue dog, trotted over with something in his mouth, a weathered leather journal. Camille gasped. "I've been looking for that everywhere." She pried it from the dog's jaws, revealing her father's handwritten entries about the Kingsley estate. One page, dated months before his death, stopped Quincy cold. "Patricia told me to uproot Mrs. Sterling's rose bushes today. Said they made the East Wing look like the projects. Left them in the compost pile, then dug them out after dark. Planted them behind my tool shed. Some things deserve to grow where they're planted." Quincy's throat tightened. Those same roses now bloomed outside his mother's apartment, gifted anonymously years ago. Camille wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "Guess we both got our answers today. The real magic happened over tea." As Quincy flipped through Robert's journal, he found a folded blueprint tucked in the back, the Kingsley estate's original landscaping plans, with red pen circling hidden drainage issues. "This could have saved them millions in foundation repairs," Camille murmured. "Why wouldn't he?" Then she saw the sticky note. "Tried to warn Mr. Kingsley 3 times. He said, 'Stick to raking.'" Quincy didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and texted Bradley Kingsley a single photo of the blueprint with the caption, Your grandfather's pride just cost you $8 million in structural damage. My offer still stands. By sundown, two remarkable things happened. Bradley quietly joined Sterling Logistics as a sustainability consultant, and Patricia's prized gazebo collapsed into a sinkhole live on TikTok. Some reckonings don't come with fireworks. They come with banana bread, a rescued journal, and the quiet understanding that the seeds of justice often grow in hidden soil. As Quincy drove back to Newark, Camille's final words echoed in his mind. Daddy always said the most important work happens where no one's watching. Vera was waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea. Without a word, she handed him a trowel and pointed to the roses now in full defiant bloom. Quincy's hands shook as he dialed the nurse back, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. But when he arrived at Capital Care, he found Vera sitting upright in bed, scolding a young doctor for fussing over her. "Child, I've survived worse than a little dizzy spell," she chided, then winked at Quincy. "Though I suppose fainting is more dramatic than my usual flair. The tests revealed nothing serious, just exhaustion from a lifetime of pushing through." But as Quincy helped his mother into the car, he noticed her wince when she thought he wasn't looking. That night he found her old medical records buried in a drawer. Page after page of deferred treatment, skipped prescriptions, and handwritten notes. Quincy's tuition due, cancel PT sessions. The next morning, Quincy made 2 phone calls. The first was to open a state-of-the-art community health clinic in Newark named after Vera's late sister. The second to Camille Pierce. "I need your help," he said simply. Within weeks, former Kingsley employees, groundskeepers, kitchen staff, chauffeurs flooded the clinic with stories of workplace injuries they'd endured in silence. The most shocking, Robert Pierce's untreated back injury from lifting Patricia's antique armoire. The same injury that likely contributed to his early death. Patricia's final humiliation came not from the press but from her own body. A photo leaked of her hobbling into a Manhattan urgent care the same week Vera cut the ribbon at her clinic, surrounded by Robert's former co-workers. The caption wrote itself, "Some pay with pride, others pay with pain." As autumn leaves fell, Quincy and Vera sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the roses gold. She reached for his hand, her skin paper thin but her grip iron strong. "You fixed a lot of broken things, baby," she murmured. He squeezed back, thinking of Camille's father under his oak tree. "Not nearly as much as you did. Some legacies aren't measured in victories, but in quiet repairs. The kind that heal wounds no one else can see." And as the clinic's first patients began to walk a little taller, the world kept spinning, unaware that its axis had shifted just a little more toward justice. Quincy didn't tell Vera about the private specialist he'd booked, the one who arrived at her apartment with a mobile EKG machine and a demeanor so calm it could settle storms. Instead, he made her favorite cornbread and pretended not to notice when she rolled her eyes at the fuss. But as the doctor listened to her heartbeat, Quincy's phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Camille. "Found Daddy's old medical records in that journal. Kingsley's on-site nurse dismissed his chest pains as heartburn for months." The revelation hit like a lightning strike. That afternoon, Quincy quietly expanded the Vera Sterling Community Clinic to include a mobile health unit specifically for service workers whose employers ignored their symptoms. The first patient, a Kingsley estate gardener with untreated carpal tunnel, who broke down weeping when the nurse handed him a wrist brace. "Nobody ever looked at my hands before," he whispered. The moment went viral when his daughter posted it with the caption, "Real healthcare looks like this." Meanwhile, Vera's stubbornness took an unexpected turn. During her follow-up appointment, she befriended a terrified teenager in the waiting room, a pregnant girl whose wealthy boyfriend had abandoned her. "Come on, baby," Vera said, tucking the girl under her arm. "We're adding one more to our Sunday dinner." Quincy arrived home to find his mother teaching the girl how to make her famous peach cobbler, the kitchen smelling of cinnamon and second chances. The final twist came from Patricia Kingsley herself. A handwritten note arrived by courier, the shaky script barely resembling her usual sharp strokes. I dream about your mother's roses. They've overtaken my entire garden. Quincy almost tossed it until he flipped it over and saw the P.S. My cardiologist says stress kills. Tell Vera she won. That Sunday, as Quincy watched Vera laugh with her new adopted granddaughter, he finally understood the true currency of their battle. It wasn't wealth or vindication, it was this, the unshakable peace of knowing some victories grow quietly like roses in unexpected places. And as the teenager's nervous hands carefully crimped the cobbler crust under Vera's guidance, Quincy realized this was the legacy that mattered. Not boardrooms or headlines, but the quiet art of turning wounds into wisdom and strangers into family. Some healings don't show up on EKGs. They pulse in the spaces between heartbeats and the recipes passed down in the hands we hold when life gets heavy. And as the oven timer dinged, filling the apartment with the scent of peaches and possibility, Quincy knew no amount of money could buy this kind of wealth. The morning of the Vera Initiative's launch, Quincy arrived early to find a line already stretching around the block, not just for the free health screenings and grocery vouchers, but for something far more precious: recognition. Then came the moment that broke the internet. A frail, elderly man in a faded UPS uniform shuffled forward, gripping a yellowed photo of Vera from 1998. She'd been his son's third-grade teacher and had paid his ADHD medication for a year out of pocket. Been carrying this 25 years, he rasped as Vera's hands flew to her mouth. Time to say thank you proper. But the real surprise came at noon. Patricia Kingsley's estranged granddaughter, Lila, a NYU sociology student, showed up unannounced with 6 friends, all wearing I Am the Help t-shirts and hauling crates of donated textbooks. This isn't charity, Lila announced to the cameras that inevitably followed. It's reparations. The photo of her and Vera stacking books together broke the internet, especially when juxtaposed with Patricia's leaked email complaining about ungrateful staff. Quincy's phone blew up with investors wanting to contribute, but he declined all but one, a 7-figure donation from Camille Pierce's students raised through a viral Pennies for Change campaign where kids emptied piggy banks to honor Robert's legacy. Daddy would have loved this, Camille whispered as they cut the ribbon on the new after-school program. The final twist: Patricia herself arrived in a black sedan as the event wound down, watching from the shadows as Vera helped a little girl with braids practice reading. No confrontation, no dramatic scene, just a wealthy old woman finally understanding what true power looked like. As her driver pulled away, Patricia left behind a single envelope on the welcome table. Inside was a signed deed granting the Kingsley estate's sprawling gardens to the Vera Initiative for Urban Farming. The note read simply, "Some roses deserve to grow where everyone can see them." That night, as Quincy helped his mother unpack donated school supplies, she paused, holding up a box of crayons with a soft chuckle. Never thought my legacy would come down to wax and paper. Quincy kissed her forehead. No, Ma, it came down to heart. Some revolutions don't roar, they bloom quietly, one healed wound, one fed child, one recognized worker at a time. And as the Vera Initiative spread to 7 cities by year's end, the world learned an invaluable lesson: the mightiest empires aren't built on marble floors, but on kitchen tables where love and principle are passed down like precious heirlooms. Quincy braced himself as Vera's words came through the phone, not with judgment, but with a quiet knowing. Dwayne called me last night, too, she said, her voice steady. Turns out he's been in a VA hospital in Texas all these years. PTSD from Desert Storm, then addiction, then, well, pride. The truth hit Quincy like a gut punch. His uncle hadn't abandoned him. He'd been fighting invisible battles no one could see. That afternoon, Quincy found himself standing outside a modest Houston bungalow, heart pounding. Before he could knock, the door creaked open, and there stood Dwayne, leaning on a cane, his once broad shoulders now stooped, but his eyes still holding that same spark Quincy remembered. The hug lasted longer than either man would ever admit. Inside the walls told a story Quincy never expected. Newspaper clippings of sterling logistics milestones were carefully pinned beside Quincy's high school graduation photo. A shoebox under the couch held every birthday card Dwayne had written but never sent, each one signed, "Your Uncle Always." The real twist came when Dwayne limped to the kitchen and returned with a rusted toolbox, the same one Quincy's father had used. "Kept it for you," he rasped. "Knew you'd build something great." Back in Newark, Vera welcomed her brother-in-law with open arms and zero fanfare, serving his favorite peach cobbler like no time had passed. But the true healing came later that night when Dwayne handed Quincy a faded Polaroid none of them had seen before, Quincy's father kneeling beside a 5-year-old Quincy, teaching him to tie his shoes under the same oak tree that now shaded Robert Pierce's memorial at the Vera Initiative. Some silences aren't abandonment. Some wounds aren't meant to stay open. And as the three of them sat on Vera's porch watching fireflies dance just like they had decades ago, Quincy realized forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something new from its broken pieces. The next morning, Dwayne showed up unannounced at the Vera Initiative's job training center, rolling up his sleeves beside former Kingsley employees. By week's end, he'd become the program's most requested mentor, not because of his famous nephew, but because he looked these broken men in the eye and said the words they needed most. "I've been there too." Patricia Kingsley's final email to Quincy arrived that same day. Just 2 lines. "You win. Some families are stronger than money." He deleted it without replying. Some victories don't need acknowledgement, they're written in the quiet moments, like watching your mother laugh with the uncle you thought was lost forever while the scent of peach cobbler fills the air like a promise kept. The conversation ended with an unspoken promise, no grand declarations, just a simple, "I'll call again tomorrow." But what Quincy didn't know was that Dwayne had already boarded a Greyhound bus to Newark, clutching a shoebox of memories and a heart full of regret. 3 days later, Quincy walked into Vera's kitchen to find Dwayne sitting at the table, carefully repairing the loose leg on her favorite chair, just like he'd done when Quincy was 6. The air hung heavy with the scent of collard greens and redemption. Vera stood at the stove, humming as if this were any ordinary Sunday. "Took y'all long enough," she said without turning around, stirring the pot with the same wooden spoon she'd used to threaten rowdy students back in her teaching days. Then came the moment that rewrote their history. Dwayne reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a battered composition notebook, Quincy's father's journal from Desert Storm. Page after page revealed the truth his father had made Dwayne promise to stay away if he couldn't be present. "Better absent than half there," his father had written. "Quincy deserves whole men." Quincy's knees nearly buckled. All these years, he'd thought the abandonment was about him when it had really been about 2 broken brothers loving him too much to love him poorly. The healing came in unexpected ways. Dwayne started showing up at the Vera Initiative every morning, brewing coffee for the security guards who'd once been Kingsley employees. He didn't try to insert himself into Quincy's life, he simply existed at the edges, steady as sunrise, until one day Quincy realized he'd started saving him a seat at meetings. The final twist: Patricia Kingsley's former chauffeur recognized Dwayne from his VA hospital volunteer work. The photo of them embracing, 2 men from opposite worlds bonded by service and second chances, went viral with the caption, "Funny how the people we call help often do the real saving." Some reconciliations don't need fireworks. They happen in quiet kitchens over shared meals, with the understanding that love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up when you finally can. And as Dwayne taught Quincy's adopted niece how to throw a curveball in Vera's backyard, the past didn't seem so heavy anymore. The scars remained, but the wounds, those were finally allowed to close. That night, as the fireflies emerged, Quincy watched his uncle and mother laugh on the porch, their silhouettes merging with memories of a man they'd all loved and lost. Some silences do cost too much. But some are just waiting for the right moment to be broken. Camille's voice cracked as she held up her father's rusted name tag from the Kingsley estate, Robert Pierce groundskeeping, the letters nearly worn away from years of use. Today his name is on this building. The crowd erupted as she gestured to the newly unveiled sign above the stage, the Robert Pierce Center for Worker Dignity. Then came the moment no one expected. A hush fell over the warehouse as the back doors swung open. Dwayne Sterling entered pushing a wheelchair, not Vera's, but one occupied by a frail, silver-haired woman in a faded Kingsley uniform. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people recognized Martha Wilkins, the Kingsley's 82-year-old former housekeeper who'd been fired after requesting knee surgery. "Miss Martha taught me to tie my tie for my first job interview," Dwayne announced, his voice rough with emotion. The room burst into applause as Martha, who hadn't left her apartment in years, stood shakily to cut the ribbon with gardening shears. But the real surprise came via live stream. As the ceremony concluded, Quincy's team projected a video message from an unexpected supporter, Lila Kingsley, Patricia's granddaughter, standing beside warehouse workers in 4 different countries. "The Vera Initiative is going global," she announced, unveiling partnerships with labor unions from Detroit to Delhi. The screen split to show real-time donations flooding in: $5 from a single mom in Milwaukee, $10,000 from a German automaker, all tagged "Dignity is priceless." As the crowd cheered, Quincy knelt beside his mother's wheelchair. Vera's hands, now gnarled with arthritis, clutched a faded photo of Quincy's father, the one Dwayne had brought home. In the image, a young Robert Pierce stood beside him at a labor rally, their signs reading "Respect or Nothing." The circle had closed. That night, as fireworks lit up the Newark skyline, Camille found Quincy on the rooftop. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sparks reflect in the warehouse windows below. A building that had once stored goods, now storing hope. Some victories aren't measured in headlines or hashtags, but in the weight of a name tag finally given its due, in the creak of a wheelchair that no longer hides in shame, in the unbroken chain of hands that lift as they rise. And as the last firework faded, Quincy knew this was just the beginning. Quincy was still processing Vera's words when his phone buzzed with a notification: the Kingsley Group stock had officially been delisted. But before he could react, a second alert popped up. "Breaking: Patricia Kingsley spotted volunteering at Bronx Soup Kitchen." The attached photo showed a haggard Patricia ladling stew in a hairnet, her signature pearls noticeably absent. Then came the twist no one anticipated. As Quincy scrolled through comments mocking Patricia's PR stunt, his phone rang. It was Bradley Kingsley, voice urgent: "Check your email, now." The attachment stopped Quincy cold: Patricia's handwritten will, leaving 51% of her remaining assets to the Vera Initiative. The timestamp: the morning of the country club incident. Vera studied the document with a teacher's sharp eye before pointing to a nearly invisible coffee stain in the corner. "She signed this before she ever insulted me," she murmured. Guess some part of her knew what was coming. The revelation sent shockwaves through the business world. But the real surprise came 3 days later when Quincy arrived at the initiative to find Patricia herself sitting quietly in the back of a financial literacy class, not holding court, just listening. As a single mother explained how to budget for daycare, their eyes met across the room. No words were exchanged, none were needed. That night, as Quincy helped Vera into bed, she handed him a small box. Inside lay his father's wedding band, polished to a shine. "Time this came to you," she said simply. When he slipped it onto his finger, the metal was warm, not from polish, but from decades of love. Some legacies aren't about beginnings or endings, but about the circles we complete without realizing it. And as Quincy stood watching the sunrise over Newark, his city, his people, his father's ring glinting in the light, he understood what Vera had been trying to tell him all along. Respect isn't just something you earn. It's something you live every day, with every choice, for everyone. The little girl's crayon drawing now hangs framed in the initiative's lobby right beside Robert Pierce's name tag. And if you listen closely on quiet mornings, you can almost hear the echoes of all the voices that came before, whispering, urging, reminding, keep going. The air in the Willow Creek dining hall turned to ice as Marcus Carter strode back inside his polished Oxfords, clicking against the marble like a countdown. The champagne tower still sparkled, the contract still lay pristine, but every eye tracked him as he walked past his empty seat and stopped directly in front of Eleanor Whitmore. "You know what's fascinating, Eleanor," Marcus said, voice smooth as aged whiskey. "My mother taught third grade for 30 years, graded papers until midnight, bought supplies with her own salary. Yet somehow she's still the help in your eyes." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a silver pen, the same one Eleanor's late husband had gifted him at the start of negotiations. A twisted heirloom. Bradley Whitmore, the family's golden boy, suddenly stood knocking over his water glass. "Marcus, come on, it was just a misunderstanding." Marcus didn't even glance his way. Instead, he flipped open the contract and drew a single line through the Whitmore Industries logo. The sound of ripping paper followed as he tore his copy in half. Then came the twist no one expected. Margaret's voice rang out from the doorway where she'd quietly returned. "Wait!" All heads swiveled as she walked to her son's side, her church hat casting a shadow over the shredded contract. "You forgot something." She placed a business card on the table, the CEO of a rival firm, one the Whitmores had spent years trying to crush. The card bore a handwritten note, "Call me when you're ready to be valued." Eleanor's face went ashen. The room erupted in frantic whispers, but Marcus just smiled. "Funny how tables turn," he said, pocketing the card. "Turns out dignity's a terrible thing to waste." As they walked out, Margaret squeezed his arm, not in restraint but in pride. Behind them, the champagne tower collapsed, glass shattering across the floor like the Whitmore family's carefully constructed illusion of power. Some losses can't be measured in dollars, and some victories. They're sweeter when you walk away with your soul intact. Quincy unfolded the letter with trembling hands, Maria's words spilling across the page. "Your mother's foundation sent a care package, homemade cookies, coloring books, even a stuffed animal for my Sophia. The note said, 'No child heals alone.'" That's when I knew. This was about more than money. The paper fluttered to the floor as Quincy's phone buzzed with a video message. A shaky cell phone clip showed a Phoenix hospital room where little Sophia, bawled from chemo-fu in her tiny arm, beamed at the camera holding Vera's favorite recipe card for banana pudding. "Tell Mr. Quincy his mama's magic works," the nurse said off camera. Sophia's counts improved the day after those cookies arrived. Then came the twist that would have made Vera smile. As Quincy left the hospital, he found the parking lot transformed. Hundreds of people stood silently in the rain, warehouse crews in work boots holding roses, teachers with their students' handmade cards, even Patricia Kingsley now volunteering full-time at the clinic holding a single gardenia. But it was the sight of Dwayne leading a veteran's honor guard that shattered him. One by one they stepped forward, not with speeches but with offerings, a mechanic's grease-stained bandana, a barista's apron, a janitor's key ring. Each placed in a growing circle around Vera's portrait, building a monument to the invisible hands that keep the world turning. The next morning, Quincy woke to find Trevor at his door holding 2 plane tickets. "Maria invited us to Sophia's birthday party in Phoenix," he said simply. "Thought you might need this." He placed Vera's well-worn recipe book in Quincy's hands, the one with "Love is measured in teaspoons and heartbeats," scribbled inside the cover. "Some losses carve holes nothing can fill." But as Quincy stirred batter in Maria's kitchen weeks later, Sophia giggling as she spilled flour everywhere, he understood Vera's final lesson. Legacy isn't left behind, it's passed forward. One batch of cookies, one act of kindness, one moment of seeing someone really seeing them at a time. And when Sophia pressed her floury handprint next to Vera's in the recipe book, the circle remained unbroken. The world kept spinning. The work continued. But in quiet kitchens across America, something extraordinary was happening. People were starting to measure their worth not by what they earned, but by what they gave. And at the center of it all stood a simple truth written in a child's looping script on the Vera Initiative's wall. I be somebody's gardenia. Quincy stepped out of the hospital into a spring rain, the scent of blooming gardenias heavy in the air. His phone buzzed with a notification. Vera Challenge was trending globally. Scrolling through, he found thousands of posts: a Tokyo CEO serving lunch to interns, a London nanny gifted stock options, even Patricia Kingsley washing dishes at the Bronx shelter every Tuesday. The movement had taken on a life of its own. Then came the handwritten note slipped under his office door that afternoon. The shaky cursive read, "Met your mother once, 1992. I was crying in a Kroger parking lot after being fired for being pregnant. She bought my groceries, drove me home, and later got me my teaching degree. You're her living receipt." Attached was a faded photo of Vera arm in arm with a young woman outside a community college, both beaming with impossible hope. That night, as Quincy placed fresh gardenias at Vera's grave, he noticed something glinting in the grass, hundreds of safety pins, each fastened with a tiny pearl. Warehouse workers had started leaving them as tribute. Their version of the billionaire's jewels she'd refused. The final twist: Sophia's hospital released data showing their pediatric recovery rates had improved 22% since the Vera Initiative's Healing Cookies program began. The medical journal dubbed it the sterling effect, proof that compassion had measurable impact. As fireflies blinked like scattered coins in the dark, Quincy realized Vera's true legacy wasn't in buildings or foundations. It lived in the safety pins glinting like stars, in the cookies mailed to strangers, in the quiet courage of ordinary people choosing dignity, one small, uncelebrated act at a time. Some lights never go out, they just change hands. And somewhere beyond the stars, a proud teacher smiled, whispering to the universe, "That's my boy." The doors of the Kingsley Group headquarters hadn't even finished swinging shut behind Quincy when Patricia's phone lit up with the first notification. A Bloomberg alert: Sterling Logistics terminates $900 merger amid allegations of racial insensitivity. Her champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor just as the board members' phones began erupting in unison. But Quincy wasn't done. By midnight, he'd done the unthinkable. He'd personally called every major investor in the Kingsley Group's pipeline. Not with anger, but with cold, surgical precision. "You should know who you're in business with," he'd said, attaching security footage of the terrace incident, now edited with captions for the hearing impaired. "Are we letting the cleaning staff dine with us now?" played on loop. Meanwhile, across town, Vera sat at her kitchen table, flipping through Quincy's childhood photo album. A knock interrupted her. Bradley Kingsley stood on her porch, tie askew, holding a bottle of vintage Bordeaux, his father's apology wine. "Mrs. Sterling," he stammered. We didn't." Vera didn't let him finish. She took the bottle, examined the label, and poured it slowly down the storm drain. "Tell your mother," she said, voice steady as a judge's gavel. "Some stains don't wash out." The next morning, the Wall Street Journal ran a front-page photo of Quincy walking into a breakfast meeting with the CEO of Kingsley's fiercest competitor. The headline: "The 900 million lesson: why respect is the new currency." Patricia's empire didn't crumble in a day. But when the SEC subpoenas arrived the following week, sparked by an anonymous tip about Kingsley's offshore accounting practices, even her pearls couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. As for Quincy, he'd already moved on. The new deal he signed that afternoon included an unusual clause: All company events will be held at venues with a proven record of inclusive practices. And in the front row, wearing her Sunday best, Vera Sterling smiled as the cameras flashed. Some victories taste sweeter than champagne. The viral storm wasn't just trending, it was rewriting corporate America's rulebook overnight. By dawn, Respect is Priceless had overtaken celebrity gossip on Twitter, while TikTok edits juxtaposed Patricia's sneer with Quincy's mic drop exit set to the beat of protest anthems. But the real earthquake came at 8:03 a.m. when the NASDAQ ticker flashed an alert. Kingsley Group stock had plummeted 18% in pre-market trading. Then came the uninvited guest at Patricia's panic room board meeting, her eldest daughter Caroline, slamming a resignation letter onto the mahogany table. "I won't be the face of this dumpster fire," she declared, tossing her company keycard into Patricia's lap. The security footage leaked within the hour, Caroline's Louboutins clicking past paparazzi as she hailed a cab to Sterling Logistics headquarters. Quincy, meanwhile, sat in his childhood bedroom turned home office, watching his mother pin the press conference photo to her wall of wins beside his college diploma. "You know what they're calling you," Vera said, handing him a plate of cornbread still warm from the oven. "The CEO who broke the internet." He snorted, but she wasn't joking. On CNN, a panelist marveled at how one man's refusal to bend had exposed an entire ecosystem of silent complicity. The twist. At that very moment, 3 Kingsley warehouse workers in Ohio were live streaming their walkout, holding handwritten signs, "We're not the help either." By lunchtime, the hashtag #NotTheHelp had gone global, with hotel staff, delivery drivers, and even a NASA engineer sharing stories of invisible dignity. Patricia's lawyers threatened defamation. Her PR team spun statements about misinterpreted banter. None of it mattered. Because when Quincy's phone buzzed with a call from the White House, yes, that White House asking him to chair a new corporate ethics task force. The world heard the message loud and clear. Some lines once crossed can't be uncrossed with money. And Vera, she kept baking, because revolutions like cornbread need time to rise. The tension in the conference room was shattered by an unexpected interruption, Quincy's assistant bursting through the doors with a delivery. Not documents, not coffee, but a battered cardboard box marked Newark Warehouse 1. Inside, a stack of handwritten letters from Sterling Logistics' earliest employees, the truck drivers and floor workers who'd loaded pallets alongside Quincy when he was just a kid with a dream. The top note read, "We'd rather eat ramen with integrity than steak with shame." Olivia's phone buzzed with a notification. The Kingsley Group's top European partner had just pulled out of a joint venture, their statement blunt, "We don't dine with bigots." Nathan's spreadsheet projections flickered as the numbers recalculated in real time. Sterling's social media mentions had spiked 900%, and their recruitment portal crashed under a flood of applications. Then came the mic drop moment. Quincy's youngest sister, Maya, a first-year law student, appeared on the conference room screen via Zoom, her dorm room visible behind her. "I've got 3 words for you," she said, holding up a legal brief. "Hostile work environment." She dug up 7 former Kingsley employees willing to testify about Patricia's casual racism, and the New York Times was already on the line. Marcus Peaton exhaled sharply. "Well, guess we're not the ones who should be worried about legal backlash." Quincy finally stood, unfolding a crumpled receipt from his pocket, his mother's first paycheck. From cleaning houses, the amount barely covering a week's groceries. He smoothed it on the table like a sacred text. "This is what 900 million looks like when you earn it the hard way." Kingsley's money was never the prize. Outside, the skyline glittered indifferent. But in that room, something irreversible had shifted. The CFO closed his laptop. The COO cracked a smile, and Olivia Harrington pulled up a new slide for their emergency press release, a single line in Sterling Logistics' signature font. "Integrity isn't a line item. Some storms don't just pass. They change the landscape forever." The silence in the Kingsley study was shattered by the screech of Patricia's chair as she stood abruptly, her diamond bracelet catching the light like a warning. "Enough!" she hissed, slamming a leather-bound ledger onto the table. Pages fluttered open, revealing columns of offshore account numbers, their so-called insurance policy. Clinton paled. "You kept records after what happened with the IRS last." A knock at the door cut him off. Their butler entered holding a silver tray with a single envelope. No return address. Patricia sliced it open with a letter opener, then froze. Inside was a grainy photograph of her late husband shaking hands with a known labor violator in Manila dated 2 weeks before the factory fire that killed 47 workers. Scribbled in red ink, "How's the view from your glass house?" Meanwhile, at the diner, Quincy's phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was hushed, urgent, "Check your secure drop box." The Kingsleys aren't just racist, they're criminals. Minutes later, Quincy stared at his screen, watching security footage of Patricia instructing her CFO to bribe a city inspector. The timestamp. The same week Sterling Logistics had lost their biggest municipal contract last year. Trevor's coffee cup clattered against its saucer as Quincy turned the screen toward him. "This changes everything," Quincy murmured. But before he could react, the diner's TV switched to a breaking news alert: Kingsley Group CFO found dead in apparent suicide. The chyron below scrolled faster than anyone could read. Stock suspended, federal subpoenas issued, whistleblower claims. Back at the estate, Patricia's pearls snapped, scattering across the floor like hailstones as she screamed at Clinton, "You were supposed to handle this." But the real blow came when Caroline stormed in, live streaming on her phone to 2.3 million followers. Meet the family who thought money made them untouchable. Quincy didn't celebrate. He drove straight to his mother's apartment, where Vera was waiting with 2 glasses of sweet tea. "Sit," she said, pushing a weathered journal across the table, her decades-old diary entry about the day. Little Quincy came home crying because a teacher said, "People like us don't get corner offices." Below it, she'd written in fresh ink, "Look at you now. Some battles aren't fought with fists or fortunes, but with the quiet certainty of a mother's love. And that's a force no empire can corrupt." Vera's hands tightened around her purse strap, the same one she'd carried that day at the country club, before answering. "Would I have preferred he sold his soul for a check?" Her quiet laugh carried the weight of 1,000 working-class mothers. "Honey, I scrubbed floors so he wouldn't have to kneel for anyone." The clip went viral before the interview even ended, soundtrack to Nina Simone's "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free." Meanwhile, in the Kingsley penthouse, Eleanor Wynne was drafting her resignation letter when the real bombshell hit. A whistleblower from their Singapore office leaked internal emails to the Wall Street Journal, Patricia, referring to Asian partners as the help with calculators. The stock plummeted another 12% in after-hours trading. Clinton didn't bother consulting his mother this time. He called an emergency board vote at 3 a.m., stripping Patricia of her voting rights for the foreseeable future. But the twist no one saw coming: Bradley Kingsley, the spoiled youngest son the media loved to mock, showed up unannounced at Quincy's Harlem office with a USB drive. "Everything," he panted, sweat soaking his Oxford shirt. "Shell companies, payoffs, the works." Turns out the kid had been quietly copying files for years, waiting for his moment. Quincy didn't flinch. He handed the drive to his legal team and did something extraordinary. He offered Bradley a job. "Not charity," he clarified. "You know their playbook better than anyone." The next morning, Vera answered her door to find Patricia standing there, no chauffeur in sight. The matriarch's signature pearls were missing, her hair unstyled. "I came to," she began, then faltered. Vera didn't move, didn't speak, just waited as Patricia Kingsley, for the first time in her life, learned what it felt like to be truly seen. Some falls aren't from grace, they're into clarity. And as the world watched, the unlikeliest of lessons took root that redemption isn't given but earned. One raw, uncomfortable truth at a time. Quincy. He was already back in Newark breaking ground on a new community center. The sign out front read, "Built with the money we didn't take." Because some legacies aren't written in boardrooms, they're poured into foundations. The warehouse worker testimonials hit like a gut punch, raw, unfiltered clips of sterling logistics employees holding pay stubs from the early days. "This man loaded trucks beside us in the snow," said Javier Mendez, his calloused hands holding a photo of Quincy at 19, drenched in sweat at 3 a.m. The campaign hashtag #BuiltNotBought began trending alongside leaked audio of Patricia snarling to her lawyer, "Make sure they know he's just a ghetto kid with luck." But the real game changer came from an unexpected corner. Maya Sterling, Quincy's baby sister, now a viral sensation after her dorm room legal takedown, dropped a 90-second TikTok exposing the Kingsleys' secret enemies list. The video panned across a leaked document showing every minority-owned business they'd systematically undermined. The kicker, a circled entry with Quincy's name from 5 years prior, annotated, "Leverage his Newark warehouse fire to lowball offer." Patricia's world unraveled in real time. The morning after Maya's post, federal investigators raided Kingsley Group headquarters, carting out boxes of files while cameras rolled. Clinton Kingsley held a press conference disavowing his mother's rogue actions. But no one bought it, especially when Quincy's team released security footage of Clinton personally approving the smear campaign against Sterling Logistics. The final blow landed at sundown. Vera answered her door to find Eleanor Wynne, the Kingsleys' former crisis PR guru, holding a manila envelope. "For the record," Eleanor said, her voice steady, "I quit before I knew about this." Inside were Patricia's handwritten notes plotting to remind Quincy where he came from. By digging up Vera's old cleaning service records, Quincy didn't hold a press conference. He went to the Bronx and broke ground on a youth center named after his father, the same man who died working double shifts so his son could dream bigger. As the shovels bit into the earth, a chant rose from the crowd. "Sterling builds, Kingsley burns." Some fires don't destroy, they forge. And in the ashes of Patricia's empire, something unshakable took root, proof that dignity once weaponized becomes unstoppable. Meanwhile, in a Harlem bakery, Vera stirred sweet tea for a trembling Bradley Kingsley. "Breathe, child," she said, pushing a plate of cornbread toward him. "The world's heaviest crowns are the ones we take off ourselves." The cameras never caught that moment, but it changed everything. Vera set down her pruning shears with a quiet sigh. "When you stand tall, child, you cast a long shadow." She wiped her hands on her apron, revealing faded scars from decades of scrubbing floors. "Folks who can't stand the light will try to trip you in the dark." The truth of her words hit the next morning. A tabloid published grainy photos of Quincy at a charity gala years prior, claiming he'd snubbed a disabled veteran. But by noon, the veteran himself, Marine Sergeant Elijah Carter, was live on CNN holding the signed jersey Quincy had privately gifted him that same night. "This man," Elijah said, jabbing a finger at the screen, "paid my daughter's medical bills when the VA stalled. Y'all picked the wrong hero to mess with." Meanwhile, in a Park Avenue high-rise, Patricia received a hand-delivered envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid, her own father shaking hands with Quincy's grandfather at a 1960s labor rally, proof their family's fates had been intertwined long before either heir was born. The scrawled note on the back read, "You were the help once too." That evening, Quincy found Vera at the kitchen table, humming as she folded laundry. The TV played muted footage of Kingsley Group's headquarters being vandalized with graffiti, "Dignity Dollars." He reached to turn it off, but she stopped him. "Leave it," she said, smoothing a wrinkle from his shirt. "Let them see what happens when you mistake silence for weakness." The final blow came not from Quincy, but from within. At 3 a.m., Patricia's longtime chauffeur quit via Instagram, posting security footage of her throwing a stapler at an intern who'd brought her bitter coffee. The caption, "Real Queens Lift People Up." By sunrise, Bitter Coffee Challenge had taken over TikTok, with baristas worldwide refusing to serve Karens in Patricia's honor. Some defeats aren't measured in stock dips or headlines, but in the quiet moments when the world stops listening. As Quincy helped his mother plant tomatoes that weekend, the radio played Marvin Gaye's "Mercy, Mercy Me." Vera smiled at the coincidence. Neither noticed the black sedan idling down the block, Clinton Kingsley watching through the chain-link fence, remembering when his family had roots too.